Hey friends! Today, I'm going to share with you all the details of how this awesome animation from Google was made. And since this tutorial is a bit different and quite long, I'd like to ask you to subscribe and give it a like.
And as always, we start with a new composition. Let's create a solid background. We'll create the same rectangle, add a fill to it, and rename it to 01. And we'll change the size to make it this kind of rectangle. Now, using the Type tool, we'll write some text. We'll align everything, center it using a line, and add the gradient ramp effect. Let's change the colors to something a bit darker blue. And increase the roundness, that is, the corner radius, to the maximum. We'll adjust the location, the position of the gradient, and the placement of the gradient colors. Let's duplicate our rectangle, and this will be our rectangle for the stroke. We'll add a stroke to it and turn off the fill. Remove the gradient. And add trim paths. We'll set the value to about 75 and adjust the offset. We'll also tweak the end value just a bit more so that our stroke, our rectangle, is positioned like this. For the start length and taper, let's set it to somewhere around 30, or maybe even 40, just to see how it looks. We'll also round the corners for the stroke. And let's add the four-color gradient effect. Since this will be a Google logo animation, we'll choose colors that are similar to those in the Google logo. We'll carefully match the shades and tones to ensure the animation reflects the familiar and distinctive appearance of the brand, helping viewers immediately recognize it as Google. We'll also adjust the gradient colors positions roughly like this. Let's duplicate this rectangle. And this will be our circle, our little circle. So we'll change the trim path start value, which controls the visible portion of the shape, to almost 65, just a little bit less than that, around 64.95. I think that's the value we need to turn the rectangle into a small, perfect circle. And also, don't forget to turn off, or rather, set the taper value to 0, because when I try it here, something's not working for me. The issue is actually with the taper. And once I set the value to 0, it worked, and now I have this little circle. Let's exit solo mode. And let's carefully connect the offset of one circle to the offset from the stroke, so that we can easily control both of these objects together using a single offset value for both. Add an animator opacity to the text. Select the words and animate the start. Press F9 for the keyframes, and the duration will be about 1 second and 15 frames. I'm not really happy with the animation. Let's animate it by offset instead. Animate it from -100 to 100. F9. And now, as you can see, the animation indeed turns out quite a bit smoother. Also, let's link the size of the rectangle so we can change two values with a single parameter as well. Set the first and second keyframes for size and animate the rectangle's size a bit. We need to animate the size property specifically because we have rounded corners, and if we animate the scale instead, those corners will get distorted. Let's also make sure to link the stroke rectangle to the fill rectangle so that both elements remain in sync. And let's add a null object as well. This will be for animating the position. And we'll animate the position of the null objects. But first, we'll link all the previous objects to it except for the ground. Let's go into the animation graphs, and so now create a graph like this for these keyframes. We'll animate the offset a bit. Here you can see that something went a bit wrong with the size, because when the size animation happens, my rectangle gets messed up. Basically, the size doesn't change. That's because I forgot to link the size where the circle is. So basically, this is a rectangle, but we also need to link it so that everything works properly and the correct parameters are set. Now everything's okay. And when I animate the offset, my circle is positioned exactly where it should be. And here's what we have now. I'm going to lower the start value in the trim path just a bit more to tweak the animation, specifically the stroke, and we'll also go ahead and animate the offset a bit more as well. Let's also go into the animation graph and do something like this. Here's what the animation graph looks like. Let's shorten the duration for the trim path just a little bit, okay. Next, we need to make it so that the stroke disappears for our purposes, so let's just increase this value to 65. And now, as you can see, our stroke disappears all the way, leaving nothing behind. Let's do something like this: keyframe placement at frame 0, at second 15, and at second 3. And at the first keyframe, we'll set the value to 40, and at the second one, 15. This gives us what we need. Now we need to create a reverse animation for the text, so let's duplicate the animator. Let's choose ramp down so we can animate in the opposite direction. And basically, we'll create the same animation using the same animation curves. So our text will animate first from left to right and then from right to left. It will also fade out using opacity in the same way. And we'll also animate the size a bit. For the fill, but since all the rectangles are linked to size, the size animation will apply to all objects, all shapes. We'll animate opacity so our rectangle disappears completely, specifically the one with fill. Something like that. Let's move it a bit to the left so that the opacity animation appears earlier. Next, we'll animate the size again, but this time we'll make it increase. We're doing this so that our circle doesn't end up moving along the rounded part of the path, but instead, it continues steadily traveling forward in a straight line. And for this, after the rectangle disappears via opacity, the trajectory along which the circle will move still remains. And to stretch this trajectory to the right, we need to increase the size of the rectangle. Let's make an animation graph that looks something like this. We'll play around a bit with the keyframe timings. And let's create a star. Specifically, a shape, let's add a polystar. We'll select for points. And let's set values roughly like these so that we get a star that looks something like this. This is exactly what we'll be transforming our circle into. Let's also add a glow to give it a bit of a shine. We'll play around a bit with the colors. Something like this. Let's leave it like that. And we simply click Convert to Bezier Path, so we can smoothly transition from one shape to another with ease. Now, let's go ahead and create another circle and add a fill right now. And we'll make it about the same size as our previous circle. It should look almost identical. Here, the scale value is roughly 11. This way, the circle we get is almost exactly the same as our previous one. At start, we set a path pass keyframe. We'll adjust the size of the circle just a little bit, because ours isn't exactly a perfect circle. It's actually a bit misshapen or slightly deformed, so in order to get the exact look that we want, and to make sure it looks right, we'll need to tweak the size just a bit more. And we'll also convert it to a Bezier path. We set a keyframe, copy it, and paste it somewhere else on the star. And here, what happens is our circle transforms into a star on its own. This is called a light morphing, you could say. And now we need to carefully create a transition from the first circle to our second circle, and then gradually transition into the star. We pick a white color and adjust the size a bit more. Next, we need to carefully find a specific point where the two shapes align perfectly, so that we can trim the first circle and basically leave the second one in place, ensuring that we get a really smooth and seamless transition between them. And then we need a pass from our other circle. Specifically, we need to set a keyframe and insert it into the position of the shape of our other circle. This first circle was basically created so that we could copy the rectangle path from here, which is a necessary step in setting up our animation. By doing this, we make sure that our final circle, the one that will have the star inside, will move smoothly and accurately along the correct trajectory, following the exact path we want for the animation. So we position the animation of the circle's movement like this, carefully adjusting its timing and placement so that it matches up with our very first circle. This way, the animation stays visually consistent and the movement appears smooth and intentional. Right now, it doesn't match. We need to figure out exactly where to place it so that they line up. Something like this. And at that point, you can create a smooth transition. Here, for example, at this moment you can cut off one part of one circle and leave the next part of the other. I cut it wrong. So let's undo it and cut it properly. And now we get this movement. So we have a smooth and proper transition, but we still have a rectangle with a visible stroke. It also needs to be trimmed because you can see that it goes beyond the boundaries. To make it smooth. And let's adjust the path of movement a bit for our next circle. So let's use guides to determine exactly where it's positioned so nothing shifts out of place, and we'll move the path it's following to the right, making sure it's a straight line. And now our circle stays in the same position, but instead of moving along that curved path, it will move in a straight line. Just like that. We'll also go ahead and perform convert to Bezier path, and then carefully copy the star's path. I tweaked this part a bit, so now it will look like this. And we paste the star's path so that our circle transforms into a star. This is how the transformation into a star happens. I also have a prepared Google logo in these colors. And now we need to recreate it. I'll recreate it simply using the pen tool, but yes, this will be a rough version. Some things might be a bit uneven, but for a general understanding of how this is done and created, I think it will be clear. If you want to fully recreate it, you'll need to spend quite a bit more time to make sure everything is even. You'd need to set up more guides and maybe your own grids. But I'll just do it roughly. And here, using the pen tool, we roughly mark out and place points, so to speak, at the quarters of the logo and at the final position as well. Now we align it so that the end is at the same angle as the end of the logo. So it's not 90 degrees there, it's probably, I don't know, 135 or maybe 150 degrees. We'll also adjust it so the logo is just a little bit straighter, set up some guides so they're roughly centered on the logo, and carefully move our points along these guides, making sure everything stays aligned. Just to even things out a bit. We'll tweak it a little more as well. Our sliders. And we add extra guides if needed. Something like this, more or less. Of course, it might be a bit uneven in some places, but just to give you a general idea of how this is drawn and how it's done, this is how it looks. And I can see here that something's a little off. We need to even it out a bit. Turn off all the guides and all the grids. And this will be our first part of the logo. Here's the blue one, the second is green, the third is yellow, and the fourth is red. We are taking the colors directly from the logo itself. We add trim paths because we need to have just a specific part of the logo. And we adjust the trim paths value. Next, we drop the second layer underneath. We increase the trim paths value the same way, and by increasing the value, the green color appears. Then we do exactly the same thing with the third part. We increase the value, and since this is an orange or yellowish color, only this particular part will become visible, because it's underneath, below the blue color, and so it only appears when we adjust the value in this specific area. So this is what we get. This is the logo we end up with. This is done so that we can animate it later. So I didn't just split it into 4 parts for no reason. Although, honestly, this is probably one of the quickest ways to draw this in After Effects and split it into 4 parts. Nice and quick. And now we need to animate the trim paths. Specifically, the end value, we set keyframes. Select all 4 layers. Press U to see what keyframes we have there. Set the next keyframes. And on the first keyframe, set the value to 0, the animation graph to 75. And we end up with this cool animation using trim paths. But right here, we have this kind of artifact, and because our logo is a bit non-standard, this artifact appears. And in this case, well, you can't even use round cap, because our logo needs to have, straight lines. You can really see this artifact here. So for this, I think we need to change the end value so that the start isn't from 0, but let's say from 20. And then we end up skipping this artifact area where the connection is bad. Maybe even a bit more, 23. And now we get this kind of animation. Basically, when transitioning, it won't really be noticeable that our logo doesn't start from 0. So yeah, we can just leave it like this. And let's set up some guides so we know exactly where the logo is positioned. Because we're going to transition from the star to the Google logo. And we need to know where the star should fly in to transform into the logo. Next, we probably need to animate the scale a little bit just for demonstration. For the star, and something shifted a bit, the position moved. We need to fix that. You can just stretch it a bit with Alt position so that the transition matches up and it's smooth. Here's something like that. Let's increase the scale. Move logo animation aside. Let's set the animation graphs to 75. We'll stretch it a bit for the sky, for the star, for our star. Increase scale. This is a visual representation of the animation graph, which shows how different animation states are connected and transition from one to another within the system. Here's what the animation graph looks like. And let's stretch it a bit more, just like before. You might notice again that it shifted a little. Oh, this one moved in position, which is something to watch for as you work. You can stretch it a bit with Alt, which lets you make more precise adjustments to the position. Take your time and make sure everything looks the way you want before moving on. It should almost match up exactly 1-to-1. That's what I got here. And something's a bit off with the animation graph. Let's set it to 85. Bye. Let's add a null object and animate it by rotation time. It's not working. Alright, let's delete it. Let's then animate the rotation directly on the star. Expression time multiplied by 120, so that we don't just have a static transition animation, but also some extra animation. Let's animate not by time, but just animate the rotation. This is a secondary animation that adds more dynamics. And now we need to determine the area where we'll direct our star. Something like this. Let's turn on the guides like this, so we can understand where exactly we need to move in terms of position. Let's extend the star a bit so we have space, so to speak, to turn around and see where we need to go. And we'll set another keyframe and drag the star right into this square. With the help of this tool, we'll basically make our path so that we can, adjust it as needed if necessary. So that the star doesn't move in a straight line, but along an arc. We deleted the third, central keyframe for rotation, leaving only 2. This way, the animation for the position, rotation, continues right up until it transitions into the logo. We select the animation keyframes, go to the graph editor, and set the value. Let's make it 85. Here we create an animation curve, so that the star gradually picks up speed and dynamically flies into the logo. This will be absolutely perfect for the transition. And right at the moment of the transition, we need to cut it off. And that's where our animation using the trim paths should appear, specifically the logo. Draw a square. Convert it to a Bezier path. Set a keyframe, copy this path, and paste it into the star's path. So that the star doesn't just fly in, but actually transforms, you could say, into a part of the logo. This is also very rough, but I think the logic itself will be clear. It's kind of to give a better understanding, like, here comes the square flying in. The shape of this logo, this part is kind of square, so it will. The transition will be smoother. Let's also add a glow to the logo. Actually, let's first precompose it with Ctrl-Shift-Send, just to keep things organized, and then, after that, we'll go ahead and add the glow effect to it. Let's duplicate it and create this kind of effect. With the help of a blur, we'll make a smooth, soft glow. This is better than just using a regular glow. And we'll animate the opacity so that our highlight gradually fades out. Let's stretch out the keyframes a bit. We'll also add a glow to the star. This way works. That's a blue color. With the blur, it might be a bit. It might not be very visible, so let's use a glow instead. Let's add a new object. This will be a scale animation. Kind of a zoom out. And around the end of the animation, we set a keyframe and move a few seconds forward, then set the value to about 80. Also F9. Maybe even this kind of animation graph where we have this sharp moment, we won't even notice it. And then it just smoothly tapers off. And let's stretch the animation graph more. So we end up with a sharp transition, a quick scale change, and then a smooth decrease. That's exactly the kind of zoom out. And I'll change the value to 85 to make it a bit smoother. Let's see what we've got. Something's a bit off with the animation graphs. Let's start with the position. Select the animation graph and move it to the left. Let's see what we've got here. Something's a bit off with the animation graphs. Let's try to figure out what the problem is. Okay, let's move this one. Let's try this. These keys. That's not it. No, that's not it. Let's put both the graph and those keys back. Something with, that's right, exactly, with the animation graphs. Let's use Easy Copy to copy it and paste it here. We'll end up with this animation graph. And we need to fix the next animation graphs as well. Alright, let's take a look at this one. We'll copy it, paste it into another one, and also into the next ones as well. So we copy 2 keyframes and paste them into 2 others. Now it's starting to look about right. Alright, let's see what we've got in the end. Here's the animation we've ended up with. We've recreated this animation from Google. All rough. There's still work to be done. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks for subscribing, liking, and we'll see each other in the next lesson. See you next time.